Talk a little bit about numbers. I get calls and some messages from people, which is great. And often those messages kind of get me thinking a little bit about what did I do when I first started out. So that's what I want to try and cover today, a little bit about that situation. What do you do when you first start out? So when I first started out, I remember the situation that I was in, which I didn't even know what situation it is. All I know is that it wasn't a good situation. I didn't have enough savings saved up. I didn't have any investment plans. I was kind of just accepting the way life was and just working as hard as I could. I kind of figured, oh, maybe I'll make some more money doing something or discover something or something will happen where I'll get a nest egg of money, then I can start investing. And that's probably a bad place to start. So when I first look back at when I started, the biggest problem was that I was scared of numbers. And I think that's a lot of people are kind of in that situation, where you're kind of in a situation where you know that you just keep paying out bills and just keep working hard and getting that paycheck and then paying those bills, and then suddenly you want something and you really want it, and you just figure, hey, I'll just go put it on my credit card and I'll pay it off later. I'll find some way. And then I kind of got to a situation where I thought, hang on a second. When I looked at my mentor, I looked at her situation, and you know, she was in a similar situation where she wanted some more investment properties, or she wanted to change her financial future, her financial success. And she was an accountant. And I think that's really great that I had her as my first mentor, because I couldn't run away from it. I couldn't run away from the fact that I had to have my accounting side of my life fixed up first before I could even try to use some of the knowledge that I used in real estate to make some more profits. Hi, Corinne, Tim. So let's just talk quickly a little bit about that, right? We go to these courses. Hi, Chris. We learn all these strategies for making money. And we learn all these different ways, and we write it all down. We feel very empowered, and that's fantastic, don't get me wrong. But then we get to a situation where we're like, okay, I want to go do this now. So we start getting on the internet and we start looking for deals, because we've seen other people find these deals. We've seen subdivisions, or we start looking at square meterages and how do we break this up, and looking at other people and what have they done. But we kind of skip a big step. And that first big step is looking at our own accounts and our own financial situation. Because at the end of the day, you know, most of the time when you say to people, what do you want? You want money. Why are you doing this? To make money. But you still, so, you know, your first thing is money, but it's very hard to accept your situation of where you are at the moment with your money. And the only way to do that is to get serious. And before you start looking at properties and different deals and what can I do here and there to make profit, I think you've got to kind of come back down and say, where's my financial situation at the moment? And that's a hard one, right? Because we don't like kind of writing down all our debts or what situation we're in. But it's a key to success. When I first started, I had this guy, Tony Pete, that came over to my place, and I sat down and I was upset. I didn't like it. I didn't like having to put on a table all this debt that I'd accrued. I didn't even want to know the figure of it. I was just like, I'll just find a way to make lots of profit, so profit will delete whatever debt I had, but I didn't want to find out. And I hadn't done my tax returns or anything either, right? So that was my first influence when I looked at my mentor, and she was very much accountability, right? So I think that's very important that before you do anything, or even if you're halfway through, I mean, we have to do it all the time now, is go back to just sit down and write down your current situation where you're at. And it's hard. It's not going to be easy, right? Because you've got to accept a few different things, and you've got to kind of look at it and go, accept some mistakes and go, oh God, am I really in that situation? But you've got to get that number. The only way you can get higher than your debt is to know what your debt is and to know what it's doing to you. So this is my suggestion, and this is how I went about it. The first thing I did when I got into property was hire an accountant to come on board. And it wasn't about what they wanted me to do, but I told them my goal. My goal was to have 2 investment properties and a PPR within a couple of years. For me to do that, I said, okay, I've got to really handle my debt and get that debt down. So, and I've got to really just know what are my expenses, right? And believe me, once you have these figures down, it will feel so much better. So I remember when I first went through it, I worked out all my credit card bills. So I had to pull them out. I wasn't even looking at what they were, what I was spending. I was just, whatever the figure was, paying it. Didn't even know the interest rate. How many of you out there know the interest rate of your credit card? You know, you forget those different things because they're hard to accept. But do me a favour, and it's a key to my success, to know the figures. So sit down, and a good test is to write down those debts, find out what interest rate they are, find out what weekly payments they are. And I like to break things down weekly. Some people like yearly or monthly. I like it to go down weekly. So what I would do is I'd sit down, and what I had to do with Tony was sit down and we'd write down my credit card bills. And then we'd write down what my debt was there, and then we'd write down the interest rate, so that we knew next week or next month what I'd have to pay out. And I had to write all this stuff down, like monthly, what I was going to have to pay out. Then I had to look at my interest rates and kind of calculate them along, see if it was better like merging them somewhere else or what I could do with them. And then I had to look at my savings, and I had to work out how am I going to save this money and what type of debt should I pay off first, or come up with a payment plan for myself to say, okay, now I'm going to have to subsidise my wage, which I used to like going and spending on whatever I wanted, and clothes and food and entertainment and everything, and put that little bits aside and slowly cut it down. So look, it's the same thing now when we do townhouses. If you can get very good at chasing those numbers down, you'll realise that when you start doing that, by the time you get into doing big deals like big developments and that, you're gonna love that you actually did that in the background. I hated those 4 little letters, MYOB. I was like, oh, run away, MYOB. I don't want to know it. I'll just keep working hard. Look, I know other people are listening to me out there and going, yeah, that's me. I just paid a credit card bill. I don't know how I got there, but look, there is a way to get around it. You've got to write those figures down. I had this discussion a lot of times with people with bad properties that they've bought. And at this time it was around some mining town properties, right? It's great that you make decisions and you have different portfolios and you know, how do you learn unless you try different things out? And so a lot of people that I know, when the mining kind of flipped in a different direction, and this is what mining towns do and tourist towns and everything like that, is that they kind of let that one property hold them back, and they never accepted how much debt was in that property. They never knew the exact figure, the worst possible scenario. And believe me, when you come down to townhouses, you're going to have to be doing this in developments, the worst possible scenario. How much is the holding cost of it? So, you know, it's good when you're kind of finding it out for profit, and you've got to end profit there. But what happens is that when you have properties that are causing you debt, you've really got to find out a scenario like, if it was for 1 year and it had 0 people in it, how much debt would I be in? And you've got to accept that figure, and then what I've done before and other people have done in that situation is double that figure. And that's your profit that you need to make out of your next deal. So don't let things that you've done in the past hold you back. It's just a number. That's it. It's just a number. And you've got to then find other strategies to get yourself out of debt. But you've got to know the numbers. So this is why I wanted to put this out there a little bit. It's hard, but God, is it worth it? To go down, and I'm not saying you have to kind of go the next step and do budgeting and that, but just know the numbers. Just go down and know those numbers of exactly weekly what they are and what your debts are at, and then look at your scenario again and go, okay, if I want to know that number, so let's just say you looked at your income and you looked at your debts, and you're about 2,500 a month in negative, right? and you've got a job, you don't have a business or anything like that, so you really like, well, what, do I have to get another job or whatever? So then what you can do is you can say, okay, that's my goal. Let's get over that step first. Let's set goal number one is that $2,500 I'm in debt each month. My next deal that I do has to be more than that. My next deal has to at least create something that's like $3,000 a month, or else I make 3,000 times 12, and that's going to be my figure that I need to make in my next deal within the 1 year. So it doesn't force you to then go very hard. It forces you to kind of get over situations where you're in debt before, and kind of gives you a figure. Then what you can do is apply your knowledge and go, how do I get out of this first step first? So, you know, it can be a small number. It might only be 30, 40 grand, but that's great, because the accomplishment of being able to take that debt that you had before and do some type of thing with your knowledge with real estate and what you've been taught and pay that off is amazing. I remember when my wife and I did it, when we got to a stage and we did all this covered analysis, and we got our tax returns done and got back on board, did our budget, worked it out. But that day when we'd done our debt, and maybe it was 50 grand or something like that, or our expenses or whatever, and then we'd set that goal, and then we'd achieve that goal. That was our first step to keep moving forward. The way that we did it personally was that we did deals for ourselves, and because we were so good at then doing the numbers corresponded over to how we managed those deals. So because we kind of self-assessed our own numbers, we really understood that it was really more important to examine the cost of things more than what's the potential of that deal. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense to people out there, and it's a really worthwhile exercise. I know it's not going to be fun. It's not going to be like, oh, wow, I can go find a subdivision tomorrow, you know, or try to find out strategies and that. But believe me, it is about numbers, and when you do this little experiment and you kind of find out where you're at, and then you kind of double your debt, what I call it, which is look at your debt, double it, and then be in, you know, a 100% better situation next year, that's when you suddenly hit a goal, a peg in the sand, right? You put that peg in the sand and you say, that's what I need to get to, that's that figure. It's like if you're losing weight, you're like, okay, I want to lose 30 kilos. How much have I lost today? Bang, 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 bang. So play with the numbers, get the numbers right. When you're doing deals then, when you start to kind of work out deals, you're like, oh, how much can I save if I suddenly don't buy the doors straight off a wholesaler, but go and get the doors from Doors Plus Seconds World, where they have a Doors Plus, where they might have a tiny little mark at the back of the door, so the guy and the customers in the showroom doesn't want that door, so it's somewhere else, and then your doors go down to $50 from $400. I mean, you're like, well, that's great, because that amount of money there can leave me more profit to what I need. So once you start getting used to these numbers, it really can help with that success in the future. So look, that's just something I wanted to get out there. Do the numbers tonight, tomorrow, this week, this weekend, and just see where you're at, and then set that peg in the sand for your next goal of profit and what that needs to be. Thanks, guys.